The night was alive with the hum of conversations, the clink of glasses, and the muffled laughter echoing off the walls of the banquet hall. I stepped inside, taking a deep breath. A reunion. 15 years since we all walked across the stage in our caps and gowns. 15 years since I'd left high school, trying to forget the endless expectations, the need to impress, and the feeling of constantly being under someone else's shadow. My name is Dave. At one time, I was the golden boy. I had the looks, the grades, and the popularity. In high school, I was the guy everyone envied. Handsome, charming, the guy everyone thought had it all figured out. The yearbooks were full of my pictures, my face plastered across sports awards and social events. I was the hotshot. But that was then. I was different now. At 33, I was no longer the hotshot. No, now I was the guy who worked a regular office job, shuffling paperwork in a cubicle, trying to make a living. No grand title. No booming business. No glamorous lifestyle. Just another face in the crowd, moving through life as best as I could. As I walked in, I could already feel the familiar eyes on me. Some familiar faces from high school, others that I hadn't seen in years. People who had once whispered behind my back now smiled and waved, trying to pretend everything was the same. But it wasn't. Not for me. I found a group near the drinks table, talking loudly about their successes. They were all wearing their shiny badges of achievement, CEO of this, lawyer of that, all of them flaunting the lives they'd created after high school. And then there was me. "Dave, it's been forever!" Rick, one of the more obnoxious guys from high school, shouted, his voice tinged with mock surprise. "Yeah, it has," I replied, trying to muster a smile. He extended his hand in greeting, but his expression was already shifting into one of curiosity. They were all waiting for me to tell them how successful I had become. But instead, I simply said, "I'm just working in an office, nothing too exciting." The moment the words left my mouth, the group stilled for just a second. Then came the awkward chuckles, the forced smiles. The air shifted, and I felt it, the shift from respectful curiosity to judgment. They were laughing, not at a joke, but at me. It was subtle, but the mockery was there. They'd seen me as the golden boy back then, and now I was just another guy trying to make ends meet. Kara, the high school queen bee, who was now the star of a local TV show, leaned in and gave me a playful nudge. "Oh, Dave," she giggled, "you used to be the guy who had it all. What happened? Still working the 9-to-5 grind, huh?" The group laughed along, clearly enjoying the comparison between my fall from grace and their so-called rise to the top. It wasn't that I was upset, at least not at first. I had learned to let go of the idea of impressing people like them. But I couldn't help but feel a twinge of old frustration bubbling inside me. What had happened to me? The boy everyone admired, the one everyone thought would be something big, now just a guy who quietly slid under the radar. But I wasn't angry. I had grown past that. At least I thought I had. I excused myself from the group, hoping to find a corner where I could just disappear for a while. The laughter and teasing still echoed in my ears. They probably didn't realize how much their words stung. But I knew this wasn't a place for people like me anymore. And maybe that was the problem all along. I had spent so much of my life trying to fit into their mold. Maybe tonight wasn't about showing them who I had become. Maybe it was about showing myself that I didn't need to prove a damn thing to anyone. I leaned against the cold marble wall, watching the laughter continue from afar. I thought back to high school, back to when I was the one everyone envied. But now, after all these years, it didn't matter. The past had no hold over me anymore. I'd let it go, and now I was learning to walk away from the judgment, the expectations. I wasn't that guy anymore, and I didn't have to be. But that didn't stop the feeling of isolation from creeping in, even as I stood there. It wasn't just the people laughing at me. It was the years I had spent trying to be someone I wasn't, trying to meet the expectations of others. It was all the dreams I had let slip through my fingers, wondering if I was ever meant for more than this. Maybe tonight would be the night I stopped worrying. Maybe it would be the night I started living for me. The atmosphere in the room grew thicker with every passing minute. The usual pompous conversations about making it in life, the latest startups, big deals, and who was attending the hottest parties made me feel like I was living in a world I no longer recognized. But the worst part wasn't the way people flaunted their success. It was the way they looked at me. There I was, trying my best to enjoy the night, the reunion I had been looking forward to. But every smile I got was laced with an undercurrent of condescension. The people who once adored me for my looks and charm in high school now saw me as nothing more than an office worker. That's right, an office worker, a regular guy who wasn't a big shot, wasn't CEO material. I watched as Rick, the one everyone seemed to worship, basked in the spotlight. He had made it, or at least that's what they all thought. The wealthy businessman, the so-called success story. He had funded this entire event, and everyone was falling over themselves trying to impress him. From the looks on their faces, they saw him as a king, someone to admire, someone they aspired to be. As the golden boy, he had clearly carved his place at the top. I could hear snippets of conversations. People were discussing their big accomplishments. "I'm a partner at a law firm," one said proudly, while another mentioned their fancy tech startup. And me? I simply nodded, keeping my remarks to a minimum, letting them think whatever they wanted. When it was my turn, I had no grand story to tell. I wasn't a self-made billionaire or the next big entrepreneur. I wasn't a partner in a law firm or a startup success. I was just me, Dave, the man they used to know, now just an office worker. Kara, the girl who once had everyone's attention and who used to flirt with me so casually, now a famous TV star, leaned in, her words dripping with mockery. "Wow, Dave," she said, her lips curled into a smile that barely hid her amusement. "I guess you've traded in the high school popularity for office cubicles, huh?" I could tell that for her, it was a point of vindication, her way of affirming her life choices. She was now dating a powerful, wealthy man, probably the only thing that mattered to her these days. And as for me, well, I was still stuck. "Yeah, you could say that," I responded, my voice steady, unaffected. I could feel the eyes of the room on me, waiting for me to fumble, to react, to defend myself. But I didn't need to. I wasn't here to prove anything. Not to her, not to Rick, and certainly not to the rest of them. As the night went on, the conversation around me grew louder, more boastful. But I stayed calm, leaning back slightly, observing. I didn't need to flaunt my own achievements. I knew exactly who I was, and frankly, they weren't worth my energy. But then, it happened. Someone, one of the group I used to consider my friends, had the audacity to throw a drink in my face. The wine splashed across my shirt, and the room went silent for a moment. A quick glance around, and I saw their faces. Amusement, a sense of superiority. This wasn't the first time they'd humiliated me in subtle ways. But now, they'd taken it too far. For a split second, I felt the old rage bubble up. The Dave from high school, the one who once stood up for himself, the one who always had to prove he was worth something. But that wasn't me anymore. I wasn't the kid who had something to prove. I wasn't desperate for their approval. I was no longer the underdog they could push around. I calmly wiped my face with the napkin from the table, never breaking my composure. They waited for me to explode, to retaliate, to shout. Instead, I just stood up, straightening my jacket, and fixed them with a cool, steady look. This is how you treat people who aren't in your little circle of success, right? I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I let my words carry weight. and for the first time in a long while, I wasn't bothered by their opinions. The wine on my shirt didn't matter. The jeers didn't matter. The way they thought I was beneath them didn't matter. I made my way toward the door, my steps firm, purposeful. The chatter behind me continued, but I didn't pay attention. The night was theirs to own, to revel in their self-importance, but it was a life I no longer had to chase. Just as I reached the door, I heard Rick's voice calling out behind me, but I didn't look back. "You're leaving already, Dave?" he asked with that smug tone. I turned my head slightly, a calm smile on my lips. "Yeah, Rick," I said. "I think I've had enough of this reunion. It's been enlightening." I didn't wait for his reply. I opened the door and walked out, leaving the past behind me. There was a strange sense of relief in the cool night air, as if I'd just shed something heavy that I had been carrying for far too long. As I walked down the street, the wind picked up, but it didn't bother me. In fact, I felt lighter than I had in years. No longer was I haunted by the need to prove myself to anyone. The life they were living, the validation they so desperately sought, none of it mattered to me anymore. Tomorrow I would wake up, and I would live my life on my terms, not theirs. And that, I realized, was more powerful than anything money, fame, or success could buy. I was almost out the door when I heard her voice. Kara, the ex-sweetheart, now a full-fledged star on some hit TV show, had been quietly seething in her corner. She'd come a long way since high school. If anything, she was more successful than I ever imagined she would be. She'd always had the kind of charm that people couldn't resist, and now that charm had turned into fame and fortune. As I grabbed my coat and turned the handle, I caught her whispering urgently into her phone. "Yes, I'm here," she said, glancing over at me with a smug smile. "Come on over. We're about to have some fun." I didn't know what she had planned, but I wasn't in the mood to stick around and find out. I stepped outside into the cool night, my hand reaching for the door. But before I could open it fully, a tall man approached me from behind. I didn't recognize him, but there was something about him. His stride, the way he moved, an unmistakable air of authority. "Hey, Dave, right?" The deep voice stopped me in my tracks. I turned, looking the man up and down, trying to figure out if he was some new friend of Kara's or another one of the alumni I didn't remember. His suit was impeccable, crisp, almost too perfect for a casual event like this. "Yeah, that's me," I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral, not knowing whether to be suspicious or just uninterested. He held out his hand, but I hesitated before shaking it. "I'm Daniel," he said with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm Kara's boyfriend." I raised an eyebrow. So, this was the guy she had been dating. He certainly didn't look like the type to mingle with high school dropouts. He looked more like someone who belonged in the back rooms of Hollywood, signing million-dollar contracts. "I've heard a lot about you," Daniel continued, his tone now softer, but still with a slight edge. "From Kara, mostly." I could already guess where this was going. I'd been a bit of a thorn in Kara's side back in the day, turning her down when she thought I was too good for her. She hadn't taken that rejection well. Hell, she'd probably been holding on to it all these years, ready to use it as some sort of weapon. "You're the guy who turned down the queen bee of high school," Daniel said with a small smirk, clearly testing the waters. "She always had a thing for you. I guess that's why it's funny now. The tables have turned, huh?" I felt my jaw clench, but I didn't rise to the bait. Instead, I smiled faintly and shrugged. "I guess so," I said, already starting to turn back to the door. But he wasn't done yet. "You know," he said, his voice dropping lower, "she's been talking about you a lot lately. She wanted me to come here and, let's say, handle things, put you in your place." I stopped. This was getting weird. And I had no time for weird. I had already endured enough tonight. "I appreciate the concern, But I think I'm good, I said, my voice calm, trying to maintain composure. I'm not interested in a confrontation. He smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from him. It wasn't the smirk I had expected. It was genuine, almost amused. Actually, he said, stepping closer, that's not why I'm here. Kara's wrong about you. I paused. What do you mean? Daniel took a step back and took a breath, like he was weighing his next words carefully. You're not just some guy who's stuck in a small office job, Dave. You're not the failure Kara and the others think you are. The truth is, you're a lot more important than they realize. Your father, he's a major movie studio owner, right? I blinked in surprise. The room felt like it was tilting for a moment. How did this guy know about my father? Not many people knew the full extent of it. My family kept a low profile when it came to that side of my life. After all, I'd worked hard to keep my own identity separate from the wealth and power my father wielded in Hollywood. I didn't want to be that guy, the one who only got ahead because of who his father was. I said nothing, but Daniel's next words hit me like a freight train. I'm sure Kara didn't tell you this, he said, his voice lowering even more. But you're the one who funded this entire reunion. All the expenses. That's you, Dave, not Rick. Not the so-called success story. You're the one who paid for all of this. And by the way, you're also the one who gets to approve or reject every single production decision at your father's studio. All those scripts, the casting decisions, they go through you. My mind raced. He was right. I had always been the one sitting at the table, listening to pitches, reading scripts, deciding what projects would get the green light. I had always stayed in the background, doing my job without making a big deal about it. But I had never used that power to define myself, especially not in this room of classmates who had no idea who I really was. Daniel smiled slightly. The reason I'm telling you all this is because, frankly, I owe you an apology. I came here with my own preconceptions, but I didn't realize who I was talking to. And I certainly didn't realize the kind of man Kara was insulting. She's made a lot of mistakes, Dave, and if it means anything to you, I just wanted to say, I respect what you've done with your life. I stood there, stunned for a moment, processing everything Daniel had just told me. The weight of the moment sank in. I never wanted any of this to define me, I said, finally speaking up. I never wanted anyone to know who I was because of my father, but it seems like that's all they see. They never cared to know the real me. So, let them have their fun tonight. Let them fawn over Rick and pretend they're all successful. I don't need that validation, but they'll have to deal with the consequences of their actions. Daniel nodded, understanding where I was coming from. He stepped back, not wanting to push me further. But just before he left, he looked at me one last time and said, I don't know what your next move will be, Dave, but I hope you get the respect you deserve. I turned back toward the crowd, standing tall, my head held high. It was time for them to learn who I really was. As the room filled with the heavy weight of silence, I could feel the eyes of every person on me. They had been so quick to mock me, dismiss me, and look down at me for so long. But now they were all staring at me in disbelief, processing the truth I had just dropped on them. I hadn't said a word at first. I had simply let the silence settle, watching as the realization dawned on their faces. They couldn't hide it. What they thought they knew about me had just crumbled into dust. Kara, standing by Rick, was the first to break the silence, but her voice faltered. Wait, what? She looked at Rick, then back at me. You donated the money for the reunion. I smiled lightly, the calmness in my voice masking the pride I felt. I did, anonymously. I didn't want the attention then. But now, I think it's time you all knew who I really am, and more importantly, what you've all become. I saw Rick's face change. His charming grin faltered as the tension mounted. The self-proclaimed success story, The one everyone had been praising all night wasn't so impressive now. I could see the cracks forming. I could feel the sharp sting of their sudden discomfort as they realized their mistake in not seeing the bigger picture. You all were so quick to admire him, weren't you? I motioned toward Rick, who stood there frozen, trying to regain his composure. You called him a success, yet all I see is someone who's good at putting on a show, but no real substance. The class buzzed with murmurs, and I could feel the eyes shift from Rick to me. You thought he was the one behind the scenes, the one with real influence, but you were wrong. I'm the one with the power in this room, I said, my voice ringing out, cutting through the chatter. And now I'm the one who's in control of what happens here, what happens with all of you. I watched as Rick's smugness slipped away, and Kara's smile faltered. They were all looking at me differently now, not as the quiet, unremarkable office worker I'd been playing, but as someone far more significant. And then, Kara, trying to find some ground to stand on, took a hesitant step toward me. Her movements were nervous, as if she were unsure whether I would even acknowledge her. "Dave," she said softly, her eyes searching my face. I'm sorry. We didn't mean to hurt you." I didn't let her finish. "You don't have to apologize. You already showed me what you really think of me." I let the words settle between us before adding, "But what you do need to understand is that your behavior, your attitude, it won't fly with me anymore. It never did, not back then, and certainly not now." Her face paled, the reality of my rejection sinking in. But I wasn't finished. With a quick, controlled movement, I turned to face the group and then addressed the room. "And as for Kara, the one you all have been admiring, let me make this very clear. I won't stand by while people like her, people who think they can treat others as insignificant, continue to climb the ladder of success. That TV series you've all been talking about, the one where she's the star, it's been canceled." Gasps filled the room, but I wasn't concerned with their reactions. I was focused on Kara's face. It was a mixture of shock and growing fear. You can't do that," she stammered, her voice trembling. I locked eyes with her. "I just did." Her eyes were wide with disbelief, and I saw the familiar flash of desperation. "Please, Dave, you can't do this. We were just—" "No," I interrupted. "You had your chance. I won't let your behavior tarnish the industry. And as for your role, consider it gone. No more second chances." The room was now completely still, with everyone holding their breath. I could feel the weight of the power I wielded, how easy it was to cut through the charades they had been living. They had built their whole world on fakeness, on pleasing the wrong people, and now that world was crumbling. I turned away, feeling the weight of the moment. The drama wasn't mine to get lost in anymore. I didn't need to make a spectacle out of this. They had already done that for me. As I moved toward the exit, I paused and looked back one last time. "And just so we're clear," I said, my voice calm but firm, "this reunion wasn't about you. It was never about the image you've all created. It was about me, proving that sometimes the real success isn't the one that's most visible. It's the one who knows when to rise above it all." With that, I walked out of the room, leaving behind the whispers, the judgments, and the failed expectations. Outside, the night air felt different, cooler, more refreshing. The weight of the evening settled on me, but in a good way. I didn't need to prove anything to them. I was already in control. The lesson had been delivered, not with anger, not with revenge, but with cold, calculated power. As I stepped out of the grand hall and into the cool night air, the sounds of the reunion faded away. It felt as if I was leaving behind a world that no longer held any value for me. The people inside, my so-called classmates, would probably continue their shallow conversations, gossiping about their achievements, pretending that they held all the keys to success. But as I walked further into the night, each step seemed to lighten the burden I hadn't realized I'd been carrying for so long. I took a deep breath, savoring the clarity that had washed over me in the past few hours. I didn't need them. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. For so long, I had measured myself by their standards, the ones they set for me back when I was just another face in the crowd, another boy who could be dismissed as someone who was never going to make it. But here I was, the one who had all the power in the room, not them. I could hear their mocking laughter in my head, but it was fading, replaced by the sound of my own heartbeat, steady and calm. I had walked away from their expectations, and for the first time in years, I felt liberated. I wasn't defined by their narrow views. I wasn't defined by their idea of success or their materialistic measures of worth. I had realized something they could never understand. Success is not about the titles, the money, or the social media followers. It's about the confidence to walk away from anything that doesn't serve you, whether it's people, situations, or expectations. The evening had been an eye-opener. When I rejected the apology Kara had offered, when I cut her off without hesitation, it wasn't out of anger, but out of self-respect. I had no more time for fake friendships, for those who only saw me as a stepping stone or someone to mock. I had the power to remove myself from that environment, and in doing so, I had taken back control of my life. I thought about how much they had all underestimated me, not just Kara, but Rick and everyone who laughed at my mediocre life. They didn't know the half of it. They didn't understand that I was already on top. I wasn't playing their game anymore. I didn't need their applause or their approval. I had already achieved what they could only dream of: peace of mind, clarity, and the understanding that no matter what others think, I control my own narrative. As I reached my car, I sat down behind the wheel, the weight of the evening starting to settle in. I could still hear the echoes of the reunion in my head, but they didn't have the same power they once did. They weren't my soundtrack anymore. I thought about what came next. I didn't need their validation to move forward. I had always known what I wanted deep down, but I had been too caught up in the noise of the past to realize it. I had spent too much time trying to fit into their version of success, letting them dictate my worth. No more. I was done. I started the engine and pulled away from the venue, the bright lights of the city fading in the rearview mirror. But it wasn't sadness I felt. It was relief. I was leaving behind the shadows of judgment, and I was stepping into the light, into a life where I wasn't afraid to stand tall, on my own terms. As I drove, I thought about the lessons I had learned over the years, the painful lessons that had shaped who I was today. I had been pushed down, ridiculed, and doubted. But instead of succumbing to their perception of me, I had taken those moments of failure and turned them into opportunities for growth. I had realized that in order to find success, I had to stop measuring myself against their yardsticks. I had to start measuring myself by my own standards. It wasn't about the power or the money. It was about integrity, about knowing who I was and standing firm in that belief, no matter what anyone else thought. I realized now that my worth wasn't determined by how many people admired me or how much I had achieved in comparison to them. My worth came from within. It came from being authentic, from doing the right thing, even when others wouldn't. That night, as I parked my car in the quiet driveway of my home, I realized that the reunion wasn't just about reconnecting with old faces. It had been an awakening. I had walked in feeling like I didn't belong, like I had something to prove. But I walked out feeling stronger, knowing that I had nothing to prove to anyone but myself. I didn't need to be validated by people who only saw me as a stepping stone. I didn't need to fit into their box of success. I unlocked the door to my house and stepped inside. The quiet of my home was comforting, a stark contrast to the noise of the night. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and leaned against the counter. thinking about how far I had come. I wasn't who I used to be, and that was the most powerful realization of all. I smiled to myself, looking out the window into the night. For the first time in a long while, I felt at peace. The road ahead was mine to walk, and I would walk it with my head held high. The lesson was simple, yet profound. True success comes from knowing who you are and never letting anyone, no matter their status or their words, diminish your worth. And for me, that was enough. I was finally free.